Hello everyone, I'm Preston Thompson. I'm a graphic designer, and this is Liona Nyariri, and we will be presenting Some Writers Can Give You Two Heartbeats on behalf of Black Chalk and Company. Black Chalk and Company is a creative agency bringing together writers, artists, designers, academics, technologists with mutual interests in publishing, curating conversations and exhibitions, and facilitating teaching residencies. What animates all these activities is the effort to engender new culture, new forms, publishing, creative production. Our work has led to a run of synchronized events, screenings, and public tasks. These are the founding partners, Tinashe Mushkabanu and Natsiskalelo Mutiti. They operate between Harare, Zimbabwe, and Richmond, Virginia. Today they are in New York at the 154 Art Contemporary Fair in New York, and we are here with you guys at Republica. So the book is a extended conversation between Zimbabwean artists, intellectuals, and writers from different generations brought together for the first time in a long extended conversation. The topics included are beginnings, writing women, identity, influence, the process, form, profile, reading, tradition, space, audience, publishing, censorship, beauty, profile, vocation, community. So this project began with Tinashe when he was a young child, and he just started collecting quotes. And he was collecting quotes, scrappings, all from different generations, and it turned into a long, extended conversation. Do you want to go ahead and go?
Okay, so hi guys. So I'm just going to read a few quotes from the actual publication, and just kind of give like a quick encounter of Zimbabwe and my personal history with the country. So the first quote is by Zimbabwean writer Chenjerai Hove. If I go to a new country, I do not want to read its history from history books. I want to know who the country's important writers are. The Violent Land by George Amado gave me more history of Brazil than I would ever get from history texts. The true history of Zimbabwe is found in the heartbeat of Zimbabwe's writers. I am not an expert on Africa or an expert of Zimbabwe and her politics, life or history. I am not even an expert of literature, both African and foreign. I am not an academic of great renown, and I may or may not say something of great importance. And so, I would like to start here from the position of ignorance, because sometimes it is the best place to start. I do not have all the answers, but only a bucket full of sometimes trivial and sometimes intelligent questions. What I am, however, is a child of Zimbabwe. I was born to Shona parents who moved us to post-apartheid South Africa in the late 90s. It became a place I later adopted as another home away from home. My early years were informed by a virtuous Zimbabwean Christian upbringing, and then my youthful years were informed by a strong revolutionary impulse informed by Stephen Biko. I always searched for my Zimbabwean history, and I found most of it, both personal and otherwise. I knew something about pre-colonial rule and about British colonial rule, and the liberation war of the 70s and 80s. I knew that ZANU-PF was led by Robert Mugabe, and that we all had Robert Mugabe to thank for our independence. And thank him we did, as he ruled from 1980 until 2017. And in a rule of 37 years, he left a depleted economy and shattered country. I was born in 1991. And I've never known another president until the coup in 2017, when Emerson Mnangagwa became president, and up until the present, I have never known any other opposition party to rule Zimbabwe. As I got older and lived in South Africa and later in the US, I got to meet other Zimbabweans in the diaspora, and they had questions. Questions like, How exactly did Robert Mugabe come to power, and who were the other players? Why are the women who fought in the liberation struggle hardly, if not ever, mentioned? What is the 5th Brigade, and did they really kill thousands of Ndebele people because of their leader, Joshua Nkomo, who posed a political threat to Mugabe? Did Mugabe have Joshua Nkomo killed? Who is Canaan Banana, Freedom TV Nyamambuya, and Joshua Tongogara? Do my parents know these events, and do they have answers? I asked them, and they couldn't tell me exact facts. Mugabe and ZANU-PF censored parts of Zimbabwean history, and only after 2017 was some of it starting to come out. Why was there such a gaping hole, and who was questioning this hole, and where was their research going? And now, in the aftermath of these historical events, the publication group Black Chalk is coming out with this book, Some Writers Can Give You Two Heartbeats. The book does not give a heavy-handed historical accounting, but rather it does something else. First, it tells us about the writers of Zimbabwe and the contributions they made to Zimbabwean literature. Then, it tells us through the eyes of these writers an accounting of Zimbabwean history. And finally, it gives us a personal accounting of the events of Zimbabwe told through the family archives of its editors, Tinashe Mushakavanu and Nontsikelelo Mutiti. And somewhere in the middle, it tells us about the craft of writing and publishing, and the importance of maintaining this craft as a way to combat national institutions when they fail us. And as Chenjerai Hove's quote says, true history of Zimbabweans is found in its history. And then
Your mic's not working.
Oh, it's not working.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and read.
Okay. Yeah. Should I read the second quote?
Yeah. Is it working?
It's working.
Okay, sorry. She's okay.
Sorry. The second quote is by Yvonne Vera. I had to exit completely in another world for as long as it takes for the story to be told. I write for about 9 to 10 hours a day without disturbance. Therefore, I have to move from society in these times. Telephones and day's mail, meals, the price of milk. I fill the fridge with quick foods to last a long time. 40 yogurts, cheese, and dry bread. I cook after 4 days perhaps, and like a caveman, salivate at the taste of a fried egg. I have fruit salads and I prepare quickly in a 30-minute lunch break and slide back to my desk. My mind never wanders from the page. I respect what I'm doing. I'm willing to protect this creative moment and can give up friendships for it, even permanently. I have never regretted reclaiming this sort of space. Fortunately, generous and giving colleagues and family members surround me. I am even luckier in my friends who seem to understand too well my desires for solitude. And this quote sums it up all for me. The pursuit to be any kind of profession seems to require this kind of commitment. They say it takes 10 years to become a master of anything, and I would say that it also requires solitude. I'm not a writer, but rather I'm a visual artist. There are times when I go for days from home to studio in a single undisturbed pattern. Sometimes the material requires that insistent and constant dedication to creating the form and to understanding it. In her works, Yvonne Vera gives us beautifully elaborate prose where she lets you watch the story unfold. If she says that there was a fire, she makes you feel that heat burn your face and lets you lick the flames with your tongue. If she tells you about sorrow, she tells it to you about someone you know, and because the connection is so close, you can't help but cry onto the page. Vera's work gives an understanding of Zimbabwean history located in fact and fiction. Nehande was a real person in our history who is credited with having led the first rebellion against the British colonizers. And in Vera's book, also named Nehande, she wakes up this character from the dead with a startling energy. I think that writers like Vera hold our history and bring it home to us. As I'm encountering Vera and other Zimbabwean writers in this book, I'm also encountering parts of our history and an imaginative world where I can think of all the things that could have been and all the things that will be. Sorry. Okay, got it. The last quote is by No Violet Buluwayo. Whenever somebody crosses geographical spaces, whenever we cross cultures, something is lost. I remember just from my own experience that I spent the first year in the US in silence. I moved from being one of the noisiest kids in class to being the quickest, and I was dealing with all kinds of things, especially culture shock and failure to access the language. I moved from Zimbabwe to South Africa in 1998 when I was 7 years old, and I can attest to Buluwayo's silence. I moved to South Africa and I became silent. I was also a noisy kid, then I wasn't. It was culture shock and failure to access the language. I was just out of place. Of course, this was self-imposed exile, but there is also real exile. Chenjerai Hove left Zimbabwe in 2001 because his life was being threatened for his anti-Mugabe and regime politics. He died in exile in Norway in 2015. And they are also the products of our diaspora. So much has been lost because of it, and so much has been found because of it. One of the chapters in the book has quotes from writers describing the experience with exile. Questions of authenticity rise up, questions of home, questions of returning and how one returns, who can return and who cannot, and most fundamentally, what is home? Is it a physical place, a feeling, a warm embrace, or a trauma-filled event? There's an immigration crisis taking hold over the world, and it has been happening in Zimbabwe as well. More than or just about 3 million Zimbabweans are living outside of our country. South African politics is leaning towards a more right-winged stance on immigration, and this has led to widespread attacks on non-South African people. It is even more sinister when we see that Black South Africans are attacking other Black African nationals. During apartheid in South Africa, many freedom fighters fled to other African countries for shelter, and Zimbabwe was one of them. But this history is being lost too, and we are no longer recognizing what it means to be unified in struggle. And so this book, Some Writers, stands as a reminder of who we are as people and where we come from. As more knowledge on Zimbabwe is slipping out of our country, books like Some Writers work to keep our memory intact, and the hope is that we maintain this kind of knowledge production and make sure that it finds its way home. Okay, thank you.
So here are some photos from the book. The book was worked on over the past year. Here are some spreads. So when we were designing this book, we really want to emphasize a radical design. We chose not to print in black ink since that was so typical and heavily Western influence. We want to use two colors to really emphasize two heartbeats. We thought about a lot of things in pairs, so we used these two colors. We chose an asymmetrical grid with two fonts only. And the colors were inspired by Zimbabwe. They have a rich, reddish, hueish color soil. It's 256 pages, and we do have some with us here today. If you guys have any questions, we would be glad to answer some for you. And this precedes our talk today.
Okay, thank you too. Are there any questions here you want to ask about the book?
Can you talk about this color scheme of the book in little more detail? Like,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you talk about the color scheme in detail about the book?
Yes, we did not want to print in black. That was one of the first parameters that was given to us on this project. In Zimbabwe, there's a really rich reddish color soil that was inspired by this color. And we chose to use yellows as a way of being a really intellectual color.
Yeah, and also just want to add that, in Zimbabwe we speak Shona, and in Shona there's a saying that goes Mwana wevu, and basically this translates to child of the soil. So I think metaphorically the colors, especially the color red, the reddish brown, had like a nice metaphor to that idea of like creating something for Zimbabweans by Zimbabweans, and something about it being about home, and especially the fact that like both Nonsi and Tinashe live outside of Zimbabwe. So there is like sort of like a loss of connection for them there in terms of being in a space. And I think somehow the color kind of speaks to that a little bit more.
Okay, well, if nobody else, I would have a question about the grid. You said you used an asymmetrical grid in the book and
Yes.
2 fonts. Does it also have some special meaning like the colors?
We chose the asymmetrical grid again because we wanted to really create a radical book, and we were seeing so many other books that were being published with just symmetrical grids, so we were trying to break any sort of parameters that are existing already.
Anybody else? No? Yeah.
I wanted to know a little bit more about writing from Zimbabwe, like contemporary writing.
Yeah, so there are some contemporary writers. They still write. Like, there are definitely are writers in Zimbabwe now. Some of them are also in the book, like Panesh Gumadze, No Violet Buluweyo, Tendai Huchi, and Tsitsi Dangaremga. And so these are all contemporary writers writing about Zimbabwe now. Unfortunately, most of these writers are not getting published in Zimbabwe. They've had to go to outside publishing houses. And I think that for writers in Zimbabwe currently, they face a lot of, there's still a lot of political upheaval. It's a lot of censorship happening. So it's still pretty difficult, but it's happening. Like, there are writers.
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask, how did you come to choose the name Re-Animating the Archive? What does it mean for you, that statement?
Well, I think that I think when we think of an archive, it has very specific parameters, very specific ways that it's supposed to be presented. And so for us, reanimating the archive is basically about thinking about the form of a book and thinking about how we can put together this particular history of writers in Zimbabwe in a way that's not about a regular Q&A conversation or sort of like essays about these writers or kind of short biographical or autobiographical essays. And I think we really wanted to put in conversation the writers through the different writers in the book, and also because some of the writers in here have passed away or are older, and there's also a young generation of writers coming up who are in the book. So for us, the quotes act as a way for the writers to have a conversation together, and in a way that's sort of like maybe unconventional. And so it's kind of reanimating the archive in this kind of particular way.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed the first 3 minutes, so maybe you already told us, but is there a way that you can access the book like digitally? So when it comes to authors that already passed away and can't be that much read because of censorship, wouldn't it be like a good idea to have this else available on the internet or somewhere?
Yeah, so one of the things we also have is a website called readingzimbabwe.com. And so basically this website, the book is on the website, and the website basically is a collection of books about Zimbabwe by Zimbabwean authors or by other authors. And basically what we have on the website is the names of the books and the publication houses, the authors of the books, and when the book was published. So it's kind of, we definitely are thinking about this idea of digital, especially because it is more accessible in that way. Yeah.
Okay.
I was also a bit late, so I don't know if it is. So, how have you worked with archives before? Like, how did you get your material or find your material?
Right. So I think Preston had mentioned that I have not worked with archives before. I think you have not as well. But so Nonsi Mutiti is a artist, and Tinashe Mshakavanu, he's a Zimbabwean writer. So he really did a lot of the research around these quotes, and a lot of the quotes. So basically, like since he started writing like 25 years ago, he would always collect all these different quotes of the writers, and they were always kind of dispersed amongst his notebooks, amongst wherever. And so this book really came about because of him and because of his quotes that he's collected. And so him and Nonsi have a working relationship, and so they decided to start this, to do this as an official book. Yeah.
Okay, thank you too. And I think if you want to have a look, you brought some books.
Yeah, we have some books over here if anyone wants to come and have a look.
Okay, so applause again for you too. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
We